Jai Hind and welcome to Dev Talks, a power-packed week for India, diplomacy at its peak, US relations in question. The biggest discussion which is happening between both the countries, as touted by many in the strategic circles. To discuss this entire thing, I have with me Lieutenant General Sanjiv Langar, PVSM, AVSM, former DG DIA, former Corps Commander 21 Corps, a member of the Armed Forces Tribunal, as well as the fact that he was deputed to the United Nations headquarters in New York. Also, I have with me Lieutenant General Syed Ata Hasnain, PVSM, UYSM, AVSM, SM, VSM, and Bar to VSM, former military secretary to the Indian Army, retired Corps Commander 15 Corps, as well as the Chancellor of the Central University in Kashmir. Thank you, sir, for once again joining me for this very interesting discussion and a hot topic, India-US relations. General Langar, sir, I'd like to start with you. With the debacle slash upsurge slash so on and so forth that people have termed it as in Afghanistan, how do you think the relations between India and US have been affected? Is there today a trust deficit? Was there a lack of communication in some sorts? What happened?
Well, I think it's very easy to take polarized standpoints on issues which spin out uh, not based on the perception of what they should be. Everybody perceived that there would be an orderly withdrawal from Afghanistan and that in some form or the other the Taliban had been civilized and they would behave like a responsible government, and that did not happen. So there is all kinds of tensions in the air and cross opinionation. But I would like to revert to what I said when we discussed Afghanistan. Apart from the fact that the withdrawal itself has been a terrible mess, the strategic intent of the US was very clear at that time. One of the main fundamentals of their strategic intent was that they did not want to be embroiled on the streets of Kabul when they had to confront the existential threats which were staring them in the face. And prime among the existential threat was China. And also equally important, what is happening in the Eastern Mediterranean, Turkey, and erstwhile territories of Syria. As far as that is concerned, they've been very nimble-footed, and we are going to discuss that later, so I'll not preempt it. But they have clearly shown that they are going towards the center of gravity that they've identified for themselves. As far as India's relations with the US is concerned, we were being, I would say, circumspect throughout. There was never any, shall I say, revealing of attitude in the Indian circles that we are on board with the Taliban moving the way that they are. In fact, we continued to warn that there is no such thing as good and bad Taliban. But we are not central to the negotiations at that point. We were central to the people of Afghanistan, which hopefully we have retained. But we are not central to the negotiations. The negotiations were very much being, the shots were being called by the US with Russia pulling on the sidelines. And of course, Pakistan playing the role that they already have. So I don't think that there has been any great fallout or misunderstanding. Right? I think people in India did not expect a happy state of affairs by the Taliban coming to power. They may not have expected the kind of speed at which the takeover took place or the collapse took place. That came as a surprise to many. And we've discussed that. So I don't see that there is a great break between the US and India over what is embroiled and spilt over in Afghanistan, number one. Number two, I still see in the discussions that are being held and have been held that there is a great amount of convergence of interests. There are common priorities that both India and the US have in Afghanistan related to propagation of terrorism, related to a zone of instability, related to the civil populace. That's my feeling.
True. So that's a very pragmatic way of looking at it, and I think that is something one can read of what has happened during the Prime Minister's visit to the USA. General Hasnain sir, I'd like to take that visit of much talked about visit and much critiqued and much appreciated visit of the Prime Minister to USA. Firstly, it has been also touted as the fact that it is one of the most important international visits for the USA itself. So the game is actually on the other side as well. Request you to tell us how that particular facet comes into place and what kind of bilateral issues were kind of discussed between India and USA, sir.
Thank you, Adi, and Jahan to all our viewers. Let me take a cue from what General Langar said and ended with. I am totally on board with him when he says that there was total convergence of interests as far as India and the United States was concerned relating to Afghanistan. And I don't think there has been any fallout as such. Perhaps both of us expected that the government of national unity, President Ghani's government, would probably last a very long time. The Afghan National Security Forces would fight it out. A 350,000 strong force on paper would last long enough, and therefore India was really not so worried about this and that. The issues moved at breakneck speed, and you saw what happened on 15th of August and thereafter. So taking a line from there, the visit of Prime Minister Modi to the United States was a very important visit, no doubt, coming at a time when there is a fair turbulence and, should I say, a degree of wonderment about what is likely to happen in the near future in certain areas. Let's start from the Indo-Pacific. The Indo-Pacific, which is the center of identified center of gravity of the United States, awaiting attention, which has not happened for a fairly long time. The kind of attention which Barack Obama spoke about after 2008, the whole issue of rebalancing, the pivot to Asia, none of this was really happening and has not happened till now. Now, all of a sudden, it seems that the situation is opening up to that. That's number one. Number two, the surprise of AUKUS, UK US, is suddenly thrown upon all of us, and out of the Quad, you find two countries emerging, taking on a very strategic kind of relationship, bringing in a third country, the UK, which is not very positively disposed at the moment towards India. There are bits and pieces of dissonance here and there. So this is another factor. And then Afghanistan itself, turbulence, uncertainty, the Chinese influence there, the Russian influence there probably worries the United States tremendously. And then the Middle East, which has been quiet for some time, but the potential of a resurgence of terror coming back all over again, it looms large. So when you look at all these areas, then the United States probably at this time, a slight loss of confidence after what happened in August in Afghanistan. The Biden administration on the back foot, the Republicans obviously in a sense of resurgence suddenly, the approval rates of the president falling from 60% to 40%. This is the kind of time when an incumbent president looks forward to doing something substantial to improve the perception among the people. This is exactly what President Biden was probably hoping to. Bring in the Quad aspect, bring in India here and have a bilateral with India, many bilateral issues which were discussed. To my mind, what I felt was that the President Biden was actually putting off the traditional aspects of security and opting to choose the non-traditional aspects of security in the various discussions that he was having with the various leaders of the Quad, particularly with Mr. Modi. We didn't hear, as far as President Biden was concerned, we didn't hear too much about terror. We didn't hear too much about major threats. In fact, he didn't even mention China when he spoke in the UN General Assembly at all. So he was talking more on things like climate change. He was talking more on shared democratic values. He was mentioning Mahatma Gandhi. He was mentioning non-violence, values of Gandhism, and things like that. He spoke about trade. Prime Minister Modi spoke about technology being a driver as far as trade was concerned. So these were the kind of things which were discussed to a much greater extent. I felt somehow that security, traditional security, was avoided here, primarily because of a slight drop in confidence as far as the United States was concerned. It is still looking, you can say, considering, analyzing, reassessing the situation post Afghanistan, and therefore was not perhaps prepared to go whole hog as far as traditional security areas were concerned. So this is the broad line of thinking as far as the visit of the Prime Minister was concerned. It was an important visit from the Indian standpoint, re-establishing not trust, re-establishing strategic relationship. It is existing already, giving it a bit of a spurt, a little more energy, and perhaps to an extent reinforcing the American confidence. This is a strange situation where you find after many years the United States is the one which has lost confidence in itself and needs someone to actually boost up that confidence.
That's interesting, sir. And that's one of the reasons, it's being touted as a very important visit for the USA as well. And you brought it out pretty, clearly. General Langar, both of you have mentioned the Quad. You've mentioned the AUKUS. The minute, as a matter of fact, the announcement of the AUKUS came about, there was criticism that started of the Quad with regards losing its military angle. I would like to actually think that there is another larger purpose to this entire thing because, diplomatic and these kind of engagements always have a strategic value, which a lot of people kind of miss out. Would you look at the formation of the AUKUS as a complementary, activity towards the Quad itself? Is there a division of responsibilities that you see coming out of this entire move?
Let's be very clear at the outset. Quad was not designed as an alliance, and it was never an alliance. And that has been clarified several times. Since India has a historic, shall I say, sensitivity to being an ally in any form of military architecture, it has been clarified many times that Quad was a partnership. We were partners, we're not allies. Very different to the kind of relationship Australia, UK, and America have. They have the heritage of the Second World War, World Wars, and they have the heritage of the NATO alliances, of which they were allies. The fundamental difference between partners and allies. So, obviously, this move, which has precipitated finally into a submarine deal, has been in incubation for quite some time. What is, I would say, of course, France is upset with the way that things have happened. More significant is not the issue related to France. More significant is the issue related to the fact that Australia has taken the deep dive and has firmly allied itself with the US. And I feel, as Ata was alluding to it, given a foothold and a springboard to UK, which really doesn't have very much presence in this region, to come through and try and assert itself in whichever way it can. Australia is enabling UK, otherwise UK doesn't have a significant signature. But for Australia to do it is even more difficult and therefore more significant because the deep linkage of economic ties that Australia has with China. In fact, quality of life of Australia is directly linked to its trade with China because China picks up its coal in entirety. The high-grade soft coke, which comes for the Chinese industry, is all of Australian origin, apart from the other valuable metals, which go. The entire mining industry of Australia is linked to China. So for them to take this kind of a decision and openly go in for US nuclear submarines, and it's not a deal, It's a change in your strategy. It's change in your look at the Indian Ocean and the Western Pacific region. So I think that is the way to view it in its correct perspective. Neither is contradicting each other. Quad is a partnership. That partnership will continue. And it will continue to strengthen along the lines that it was designed to be: diplomatic, trade, and exchange. It's not an alliance. This is very, very much a pointed alliance. And the two don't have to contradict each other. The two don't have to converge. They can both exist in the strategic space completely parallel.
Interesting. So it can also come up to a situation when both of them are complementing each other in terms of militarily and the economic and diplomatic value that this entire both the groupings can put together, bring in. That's an interesting factor that you brought out. General Hasnain sir, I'd like to take a little bit of a dig into US politics. The Democrats aren't known for being India's best friends, and how do you think the current President Biden, would be handling that particular situation? Because it was quite a surprise to a lot many that Kamala Harris had to kind of become low in friends with somebody that she's spoken about before. So that was a change in the entire drift that we saw. How do you think this entire thing will be handled?
That's very interesting, no doubt, Adi. But if you permit me, brief reference and endorsement to what General Sanjiv just said. I fully agree with him that AUKUS and Quad need not have a convergence as such that way. They need not have a clash against the interests. Not convergence, a clash of interests. As such, both have their own domains. Since 2007, the Quad has always been considered as a instrument and entity of cooperation than anything else. If you remember, the Australians in 2007 virtually were actually the first who were objecting to the whole. India and Australia were not on the best of terms at that particular time, but today things have changed. And I dare say, to add to what General Langar said, I would say Australia's concerns and the concerns of the United States as far as the South Pacific is concerned appear to have suddenly taken a higher platform. Because, this is an area that China is very strong in the South China Sea, in the areas of the Western Pacific, etc. And that's a domain where the United States can focus upon, concentrate upon. The South Pacific is an area which it has always depended on Australia. And it wants to strengthen Australia and as far as that area is concerned. As far as the only dichotomy in this whole issue of the AUKUS has been the manner in which France has been treated. And France is a very, very important partner for us. And I think in this whole game, France is very, very important. It getting upset, to my mind, was entirely justified. Having said this, let's come back to your question on the aspect of how the Democrats would handle India. How do they look at India? Historically, if you see, I take you back to John F. Kennedy's time, his relationship with the Prime Minister Nehru, 1962, the Chinese invasion. Thereafter, 1966, the Lyndon B. Johnson, at the time of great challenges, India's food deficit at that particular time, with PL-480 coming in as assistance to India. We had a bad relationship with the Republicans as far as the Nixon administration was concerned, almost 2 terms. So it's not as if we've always had a history of great relations with the Republicans. With the Democrats, maybe not the best of relations with Jimmy Carter, but subsequently with Bill Clinton, it was not a bad relationship, although the first 4 years were awkward. 1992 to 1996 or 93 to 96 were very awkward. I can remind our viewers that is the time when we had those huge problems with Robin Raphael as the Undersecretary of State, or the Assistant Secretary of State of the United States looking after South Asia. It forced India to pass the parliamentary resolution of 1994, declaring the whole of Jammu and Kashmir as the territory of India. All this happened during the time of the Democrats, no doubt. So there is no hard and fast rule, I would say. We've had a very good relationship with Barack Obama. While the nuclear deal was initiated in the time of George Bush Jr., you found Barack Obama took it forward. So there has been no misgivings on this kind of thing. And I would not like to sort of, typify or typecast any of the two parties to say that we've had a better relationship with this party and a stronger relationship with this party. Although many in India tend to do that, there is no doubt about it. On balance, perhaps everyone likes to perceive that we have had a very strong relationship with the Republicans, because in the recent past, in the last 20 years, George W. Bush Jr.'s tenure as president, 8 years, actually saw the nuclear deal. That was a big, the whole issue of the nuclear deal coming. And then after India's declaration of its nuclear status, it is during George Bush's time that you found the dilution of all those issues of sanctions and things like that, in whatever form they were at that time, being dismantled and removed, and India being accepted as a part of the nuclear club. So that is one of the reasons why the Republicans are probably given a higher status as far as our relationship is concerned. But now coming down to the status at the moment with Joe Biden, I do think that in this particular visit, the Indian delegation was looking at Kamala Harris with a degree of greater importance, giving her a higher importance, significance, putting her on a higher platform. Because there is always, in the sense, God forbid, the US president must live very long, but if something ever happens, Kamala Harris is the one who will take charge of the United States, and we better have a very, very strong working relationship with her. One of the indicators for this, incidentally, which some of the magazines media has also pointed out, was the fact that a full delegation level talks took place with the vice president's entourage and the prime minister's entourage from the Indian side. Usually, it is just the foreign secretary or someone like that who comes to the prime minister to meet the vice president. But here, you have the national security advisor, you have the foreign secretary, you have the foreign minister, and everyone was there. The Indian ambassador to the United States, everyone was there for this particular meeting. So we are aware of this fact that this government is there, the United States government, the Democrats are there for the next 3.5 years, and we have to do a lot of business with them. It may last out even longer. So therefore, as far as Joe Biden is concerned, we've had a relationship with him as 8 years as vice president. I don't think in any way Joe Biden was committed against India. Barack Obama was very well inclined towards us. There was nothing which was against, in any way against Indian interests as such. The one factor which always comes up is the manner in which the United States handles Pakistan. Now, given Pakistan's geostrategic importance, its geostrategic location, the fact that it probably punches much higher than its weight as far as the geostrategics of the region are concerned, the new great game is concerned. Obviously, no US president is going to impose sanctions on Pakistan or do something like that. They will always have some business to do with Pakistan. So I think we have to learn to live with that, and we have to accept it. But we must keep up the pressure. We must keep up the pressure. And I was glad to see that the vice president, it was Vice President Kamala Harris, who actually took up the whole issue of terrorism, spoke about it, and also mentioned the fact that Pakistan must resolve this issue. It must go after the terrorists and things of that kind. This didn't emerge in the discussions between Prime Minister Modi and President Joe Biden. Yes. So having said all this, in summary, I would say it's not very important as to which is the party. It is still, I think it's the personality which makes a huge difference. But by and large, the United States understands India's strategic importance, its partnership, its requirement to have it on board as a partner, particularly in the context of the Indo-Pacific and particularly in the context of China. There is no other option, I think, that the United States has got but to be in partnership with India, because that's the only way that one portion of the Indo-Pacific, the Indian Ocean portion, at least can definitely be looked after by India.
General Langas, I'm going to take a little, leverage and actually ask you something on what General Hasnain mentioned is about the factor that we will have to keep the pressure up on Pakistan. Pakistan today has become a nuisance for literally the entire region, and even its closest friends are now acknowledging that entire factor. How do you think India has to, uh, keep a little bit of a focus of the United States towards Pakistan's activities and keep that entire screw a little bit tightened up?
Well, first I just want to quickly put a couple of things across about the American foreign policy. The most significant thing about the United States way of thinking is that they are not influenced by any colonial overhang. All right? If anything, that nation was formed on a rejection of the European systems, and they did not carry any baggage of colonial. As far as India is concerned, definitely for the earlier years, they were led by their Anglo-Saxon cousins across the Atlantic because they were grappling how to deal with this. But when we talk of American foreign policy and engagement with India, the primary consideration from the American point of view is pragmatism and centrality to their priorities at that point of time. That is the way India features in their thinking, to my mind. Whether it is Republican or Democrat, the American approach is pragmatism and how do you feature with their priorities at that point of time. If there is one person who can be labeled as leading a tribe of, shall I say, anti-Indian uh, thought, that is Henry Kissinger, right? And he influenced so many administrations. So you can see inflections of his thinking in various administrations. He really had a educated mindset which denied the centrality of India. We have only liberated our foreign policy, correctly speaking, 1991, when our economic liberation took place and when the Cold War collapsed. That is the time that you have liberated yourself and you started actually now seeking your position on the world stage. And the US will deal with you, as I said, pragmatically and depending on what their priorities are. At the present moment, and for a considerable period of time, they have seen India needing to be central to their priorities and aspirations. And I don't think there's any contradiction between the two democracies on that issue. There are ways in which you grapple. There are different, shall I say, ethos within each political party on our side, on their side. But in the larger issues of foreign affairs are decided on pragmatism and realism in the 21st century. There are no other isms that occur. As far as Pakistan is concerned, I don't think there is any doubt in the US frame of reference what Pakistan presents to them. They're quite clear of the capability of instability, their agendas, their aspirations, and the need to keep themselves afloat at all times. There is also a huge British stake in making sure that Pakistan stays in a state of happy economics. So that does not take away from the fact that the US is intimately aware of their nuclear weapons, is intimately aware of their backyard, which they can open up to insecurity and instability at any point in time, and is intimately aware of the fact that they are wanting to fall into China's lap, but that is not fully happening. Sections of the army and other sections of society are very keen to fall over backwards with China. Obviously, that is a cause of concern for the United States. But then Pakistan has contradictions within itself, which is not allowing that to happen. As far as we are concerned, I think the messaging over the past couple of decades has been quite clear. Firstly, We refuse to be hyphenated with them. We've moved on. Right? We have got a whole range of other priorities and a whole range of other strategic issues that we have to deal with, and we've moved on to that. Number two, messaging has been very clear that if you cross a particular line, there will be no hesitation in military retaliation. And the military retaliation can be unpredictable. That is also logged into the mainframe. All the cries that are being raised now, where instability will now flow over to J&K like it did in the 19th, it's really, I feel, a lot of rhetoric. As I said earlier, there will be inspiration. There will be a definite, shall I say, identification. But J&K of today is not J&K of 1990s, pardon my saying. The successor states to the erstwhile states of J&K, the Union Territories, are not what it was in the 1990s. So keeping an eye on Pakistan and asking the US to cauterize them, I think the US is well aware. But the US is also well aware that they will not go beyond the point. And that is known to us. So like Ata said, it is our job to keep flagging it and to keep showing the new manifestations which need attention. And if there is a sudden surge back to the time of Ziaul Haq, it is our responsibility to bring it. If they are going to play spoiler in the new Afghanistan, if they are going to carry out connections through Afghanistan with China, which are of a strategic nature, definitely it is our job to bring all this up. But you're not dealing with the US in a situation that they are unaware. They are completely aware of the potential of Pakistan, positive and negative.
Thank you, sir, for that clarification. I think it's important because it's a very teetering line that the US follows with regards to Pakistan. General Hasnain, sir, in regard to relations between US and today, I think two of its biggest adversaries, Iran and Russia, uh, does India today have an opportunity for its own gain, and I might add that for its own national interest, to bring US closer to these, in US's eyes, rogue nations, or however they want to, term it as? Does India fit into the place of bringing these two together in matters of security, especially emanating out of Afghanistan?
Thank you, Adi, for that. That's an interesting question, no doubt. But if I may, once again, General Langar and I have served together a fair number of times, and our ideas seem to be always gelling. So I thought it's always good to reinforce something which he said at the end. This aspect of Pakistan remaining a bugbear, and the United States being fully aware of it, and our responsibility to ensure that we keep flagging the issue from time to time. Keeping this particular aspect which he flagged, I thought it's important for me to just tell our viewers also that what we need to do is to have a very proactive diplomacy, no doubt, but at the same time, an information system by which we tell the world, we tell all the important capitals in the world, actually what is happening in this part of the world is not really known. No one knows about the Shimla Agreement, for example. No one knows anything about the United Nations resolution and why we don't follow the UN resolution of 1947-48. No one really knows how this whole issue of 1989, the commencement of the last 32 years of proxy war, really came about. Our narrative is not spoken of. I'm saying this with a degree of confidence, and it links up to your next question, because I'm saying it from an anecdotal point of view. I can also tell you that I went to Iran, and in Iran, I faced the media. I faced both the electronic media and the print media. I was horrified to see that many of the questions which were put to me appeared to be taken straight out of drafts which had probably been fed to them by the ISI from Islamabad or Rawalpindi. So we have to get our act together as far as the perception of our narratives is concerned with the rest of the world. Otherwise, no one is going to listen to the Indian narrative. at all. This is an important aspect which must be brought up. Next, you touched upon two very important countries. Russia and Iran. I've written about both of them of late. You see, we've got a long-standing relationship with Russia. They stood by us in 1971. In fact, neutralizing Henry Kissinger at that time was all done by the Soviets, the Indo-Soviet Treaty, 20-year Indo-Soviet Treaty, which Mrs. Indira Gandhi secured with the leadership, the Soviet leadership at that particular time. The that we have still, the orientation is still largely Soviet Russian origin. We can't do away with this relationship. It's a very important relationship. We have diluted it to some extent. At the moment, equations are emerging in some different forms with the Russians and the Chinese coming close together, but not in every area of focus. It's not as if the Chinese and the Russians are completely every interest converges. It's not so. You've seen the Russian foreign minister making a lot of different kind of statements and noises which are going on here, which are in sync with many things that we believe and feel. So, and also you got to remember the S-400 system, $5 billion that we spent in purchasing that system just now, which will probably arrive by December and be fielded next year, hopefully right there in Ladakh in front of the S-400 system that the Chinese have put up there. Right? So we are going to be dependent on the Russians to a fair extent from an equipment point of view and to a very great extent from an intelligence point of view. I have visited Moscow. I realize, and no one better than General Langar to tell you this probably, that the kind of intelligence which is generated by the Russians is rarely generated by any other country. The ability to generate, understand, put it across is absolutely outstanding. So having said that, our relationship with Russia is very important, and you can't have a relationship with the United States with things like CAATSA. You know, this countering America's adversaries through Sanctions Act. Threats of that being put on India for having bought the S-400, and when the delivery comes, and then we once again go through the whole process of CAATSA being threatened against us. You can't have this between strategic partners, this kind of thing. The Americans have to learn to understand this, that India has to maintain strategic autonomy. We have interests beyond China, of course, with China and concerning China, very important, but we also have a lot of interests with other countries. Iran is a very, very important country for us, and we know that so many years we have been denied access to Central Asia, large population in Central Asia, hugely, in terms of emotions linked with India from the Soviet period. Last 30 years, we've not been able to make access to them primarily because Pakistan has denied us this, and Afghanistan, the situation has been what it is. It's only through Iran that this thing can happen. Besides the fact that we also have the transnational north-south 750-kilometer corridor, which helps us reach out into East Europe and into Russia. So we need to do business with Iran. 11% of our oil energy requirements used to come from there, and very, very high quality oil, sweet oil, which comes from there. It's not one of those sulfur-laden oils which come out from some other countries, right? So the Americans have to realize this. Can we get the United States to start looking at Iran with a slightly softer eye? I have my doubts that this can happen. Because since 1979, 42 years gone past, the hurt somehow, the emotional hurt of having 54 of his hostages in the hands of the revolutionaries, Iranian revolutionaries, for that many days, and then having deaths of his own soldiers, the Delta Force, in the desert when they try to go and rescue them. All this has given a huge, blow to the American psyche. President Jimmy Carter lost the election primarily because of this. So I think a couple of more generations will probably be required to actually wipe out the memories and the emotions from the psyche of the Americans. Although they are pragmatic people, no friends and no permanent enemies, it should apply to them equally. And this is something that we can sit down with them and explain many times. There are many European countries, their own allies in NATO, probably Germany, probably UK itself, which can explain to the United States that there is much to gain by changing the attitude and policy towards Iran. Israel, of course, is on the other side, is an issue. And if we can quieten down the Middle East to a great extent, the threats against Israel, with the Abrahamic Accords and things like that which have come about, if the threats against Israel are diluted to a great extent, I see no reason why we can't move forward on Iran. It's not going to happen in a hurry at all, I know that. But maybe in a generation, 2 generations, because this issue of the standoff with China is not something which is just happening, going to go overboard tomorrow. This is going to last out in a couple of decades from now. You're looking at 2049 as the centenary of the formation of the Chinese Republic and things like that. So we are looking far into the future, and I think there needs to be a change in American policy of this.
Absolutely. I think for the region, I think, in my opinion, my humble opinion, that these two are kind of the stumbling blocks that the Americans have created for themselves. Their preoccupation as Russians as the target, as their enemy, and of course, Iran with the incident that you just mentioned. So, what an interesting discussion. One of the things I learned from both of you is that India has an opportunity to achieve its dream of true multilateralism. And that is something Prime Minister Modi keeps talking about. To close this discussion, so I'd like you to basically comment on this particular thing, as well as our role in the coming world order, which is actually evolving. It changed once with the aggression of China. It changed again with the advent of the pandemic, and now again there's a change. So, General Langar sir, may I request you to kind of take it forward?
Thanks. No, just very briefly on the question which you gave, Ata, and I know I won't dilate. When Pakistan engineered a bridge between the US and China, and they were the vehicle to do it, the Nixon era, both sides wanted to reach out to each other. And they found themselves in corners where they were unable to do it directly. Pakistan played the game of being the vehicle of doing this. So, when you ask the question, in the state of world affairs today, I don't think China or Russia wants to change its course and seek any form of change of its orientation towards the United States. I don't think that is the case. Therefore, India trying to play a role is denied by the fact that China and Russia don't want that role to be played. Right? As far as Iran is concerned, the United States has recognized our position very clearly. Even when the oil embargoes were in progress, we were allowed to import oil from there because we said it is essential, and our relationship is essential. But as Ata said, with the non-centrality of Gulf oil to America, centrality of Gulf oil to America now is only for its allies. For itself, it is independent of Gulf oil. So with that non-centrality, there is a limited amount of game that Iran can play in their larger calculations. So that is what I thought that I would say in this regard. You asked about our position. I think our position as ascribed to ourselves in the early 90s still has a long way to go. The main issue that we face today is that we must gain strategic autonomy. We must gain strategic autonomy and retain it. You must be able to exercise your foreign policy and your instruments of state without any hindrance in your immediate strategic neighborhood and your extended strategy. I don't think you're in the league right now to reach the level of becoming one of the major power centers in a multi-central world. I don't even believe that we are heading towards multi-central. The centrality at present is quite clear. There may be erratic centers of power, but they are very definite centers of power. And there is no, there was a dream once that we would have 7 to 10 major centers of power. That's not the case. You got some centers of power. You've still got a dominant power, and you've got some wild cards. India doesn't want to be part of any of this at this point in time. We need to aspire and attain our autonomous strategic space. That, I think, is the first step, and that requires the exercise of comprehensive national power, for which there is a lot of work which has to be put.
General Hasnain, sir.
Yes, I endorse much of what Sanjeev has just said. But at the same time, I may add, from my perception, yes, that India today is a middle power. It is the BRICS kind of powers. India is a middle power. Its economy is expanding. Much will depend on the size of its economy in the next 10 to 15 years. Mr. Modi's dream of $5 trillion, if it is achieved, if not in the earlier time frame of 2024-25, which he spoke of, maybe even by 2030, if it is achieved, and God forbid we have any more issues with the pandemic and things like that, definitely our overall stance, our overall stature would have gone up much, much higher. Because a lot depends on economics. You can bat that much stronger if you got money in your coffers and you've got a reasonable, stable economy going. You see the case of Pakistan today and compare it with us. India's the size of the economies, you can judge it by the fact that our foreign exchange reserves of $700 billion as against $20 billion, which Pakistan has got. That you can make out from that how much of a difference economy really makes. But having said that, the fact that we are under pressure from China, and this is one of the reasons why China keeps doing this to us. They don't want us to emerge. This coercion which they carried out since last year, one of the main aims I always spoke about was to dilute India's strategic confidence. Langar spoke about strategic autonomy. Let me add to it also our strategic confidence. That confidence had gone up in the last 7 years to some extent. After Doklam, after the surgical strikes, after Pulwama, or rather Balakot, after the decisions of the 5th of August, all this has added quite a bit to our strategic confidence to be able to take hard decisions, right? And this was worrying the Pakistanis, this was worrying the Chinese, and this was one of the major reasons why this whole coercion started in April 2020 was particularly this. Now, if we are to be subjected to this all the time, our ability to play a larger role gets stymied to some extent, because we are then on the defensive, seeking partnership, seeking advice, and seeking other kinds of things, arrangements with the larger powers, influential powers, and not having a say of our own. Having a say of our own is far more important. The Indo-Pacific, the role that India is slated to play in the Quad, in the Indo-Pacific, particularly in the Pacific theater, or rather particularly in the Indian Ocean theater, is of great importance. We must learn to play that role strongly, independently to a great extent. And that can't happen unless we start looking at our maritime capability. Because without maritime capability, nations, a maritime power, India has got it's got the entire Indian Ocean under it. If you don't have that capability, then your worth will be questioned. Internationally, it will be questioned. So I consider India a middle power, as I said. And at the end of the day, a rising middle power, a lot depending on how our equations work out with different arrangements that we have in terms of our partnerships into the near future and how our economy works. When these two match, when these two merge with each other, that's the time when India will be on a higher platform, a higher strategic platform.
Interesting. So that's I think a very realistic viewpoint. As a matter of fact, we've got a big jolt for the past 1.5 years with the pandemic kind of slowing us down and creating a lot of havoc. And of course, Chinese have created additional, in very simple terms speaking, additional expenses for the country to kind of bear. So that's a very broad and a very clear standpoint. So I'd like to thank both of you to actually take us through the depths of Indo US relations in terms of starting off to understand why the visit of the Indian Prime Minister was so important for the US themselves. How did the US plan for it? What exactly happened there? What were the issues that were discussed, and how they would have to cut through party lines in terms of today to kind of keep India in their sight and in their actions, because that's going to be we are kind of coming in a place where we're going to be very central to their interests and uh, their actions within this entire region. Of course, talking about Pakistan, which is a very very interesting subject today because it's going through a doldrum of uh, diplomacy failures and setbacks, but it's critical to still realize that US is not going to let it go and jump down the drain that easily because of various historical as well as localized interests. And of course, the closing comments where India's power as a geopolitical player or a leader in this particular world has some work to be done. Um, it's I won't say a very long way away, but there is still something that we need to do as a country to achieve that one dream of, as General Langar and General Hasnain both mentioned, strategic autonomy and clarity of their our own opinion in the neighborhood. Thank you, sir, for joining me today for this wonderful discussion. And till next time, for another subject, another day, sir. Jai Hind.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.